Modern culture worships comfort. We're sold the fantasy that happiness comes from eliminating struggle, that peace means the absence of conflict, that strength is something you're born with rather than something you forge. Every algorithm, every advertisement, every self-help guru promising quick fixes reinforces the same seductive lie, that you can become powerful without pain, exceptional without effort, unbreakable without ever being broken first. But what if everything we've been taught about building mental strength is backwards? Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher who spent years in physical agony, yet produced some of history's most powerful ideas about human potential, argued that we don't become strong by avoiding difficulty. We become strong by deliberately choosing it. He saw weakness masquerading as wisdom everywhere he looked, people calling their fear of challenge self-care, their avoidance of confrontation boundaries, their refusal to struggle knowing their limits. The people who transformed their lives through Nietzsche's philosophy didn't find some hidden technique for eliminating obstacles. They discovered something far more radical, that obstacles themselves are the raw material of psychological invincibility. They stopped asking, "How do I avoid this struggle?" and started asking, "What does this struggle reveal about who I'm capable of becoming?" The difference between these two questions is the difference between a life spent in comfortable mediocrity and one forged into something genuinely extraordinary. This video will reveal the specific daily practices Nietzsche believed create psychological resilience that cannot be shaken. You'll discover why your current approach to building mental strength is probably making you weaker, how to transform everyday adversity into the fuel for genuine power, and the uncomfortable truth about what separates those who collapse under pressure from those who become legends precisely because of it. If you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button and like this video to support our work. Thank you for your support. Now let's explore what Nietzsche understood about the human mind that most people spend their entire lives running from. Imagine a blacksmith's forge. The metal doesn't become a sword by sitting comfortably in a display case. It becomes a sword by being thrust into fire, hammered relentlessly, plunged into ice water, heated again, beaten again, shaped through what looks like destruction. Nietzsche saw human beings the same way. Not as fragile things to be protected from hardship, but as raw material waiting to be forged into something formidable through the very experiences we're taught to avoid. What Nietzsche recognized, watching both himself and others, was that the mind doesn't strengthen through rest. It strengthens through resistance. Every time you choose the harder path, every time you face what terrifies you, every time you push beyond what feels possible, you're not just accomplishing a task. You're literally restructuring your psychological architecture. You're teaching your nervous system that you're capable of more than your fears insist is true. Consider the person who avoids difficult conversations. They tell themselves they're preserving peace, maintaining harmony, being mature, but watch what happens over months and years. Their tolerance for any confrontation shrinks. The mere thought of disagreement triggers anxiety. They become prisoners of other people's opinions, contorting themselves into whatever shape keeps the waters calm. What they called wisdom was actually the slow atrophy of their psychological immune system. Or look at someone who eliminates all challenge from their routine. They optimize for comfort, convenience, efficiency. They engineer a life where nothing requires genuine effort, where every potential obstacle has been smoothed away. And then notice how the smallest unexpected difficulty completely destabilizes them. A delayed flight feels like a catastrophe. A critical comment ruins their week. They've built a mind so accustomed to ease that it cannot function when reality inevitably becomes harsh. Nietzsche understood something fundamental about human nature that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. We are anti-fragile creatures. We don't just survive stress, we require it to develop properly. Without resistance, our capabilities never emerge. The muscle that's never challenged doesn't grow stronger, it atrophies. The same is true for courage, resilience, creativity, everything that makes a human being genuinely formidable. He watched people in his own life choose safety over growth repeatedly. They had dreams but wouldn't risk failure. They saw possibilities but feared judgment. They felt called to something greater but couldn't tolerate the discomfort of transformation. And year after year, he saw those same people become smaller, more bitter, more resigned, not because life crushed them, but because they crushed themselves by refusing to be tested. The ones who succeeded, in Nietzsche's observation, shared a specific characteristic. They didn't just endure difficulty, they actively sought it out. They understood that comfort is seductive but dangerous, that ease feels good in the moment but creates weakness over time. They deliberately placed themselves in situations that demanded more than they currently possessed, knowing this was the only way to expand what they possessed. But here's what most people miss about building genuine mental strength. It's not about grand, dramatic gestures. It's not about climbing mountains or running marathons or quitting your job to find yourself. Those things might be part of it, but they're not the essence. The essence is in the daily, unglamorous, relentless practice of choosing difficulty over ease in small but consistent ways. It's in the accumulation of tiny acts of courage that slowly, imperceptibly, forge a mind that cannot be broken. Nietzsche knew that most people fail, not because they lack some innate capacity for strength, but because they misunderstand the mechanism through which strength is built. They wait to feel ready. They search for the perfect method. They convince themselves that when circumstances improve, then they'll start. Meanwhile, the very act of waiting, of preparing, of postponing, is teaching their nervous system that challenge should be avoided, that comfort should be preserved, that their current limitations are permanent rather than temporary. The truth Nietzsche kept returning to was both liberating and terrifying. You have to forge yourself in the fire. Nobody else can do it for you. No book, no teacher, no technique can give you an unbreakable mind. They can only point you toward the forge and tell you what happens when you step into it willingly rather than being dragged there by circumstance. The habits that build psychological steel aren't comfortable. They're not supposed to be. Comfort is precisely what you're training yourself to function without. If you identified with the struggle of wanting mental strength but avoiding the practices that create it, click the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for your support. So what are these practices? What did Nietzsche actually believe transforms ordinary human psychology into something genuinely formidable? Let's examine the specific principles he articulated, forged from his own experience of turning physical weakness into philosophical power. The conventional understanding of mental toughness is completely inverted. People think it means never feeling fear, never experiencing doubt, maintaining constant confidence. They imagine someone with a mind of steel as impervious to emotion, unmoved by hardship, robotically consistent. This is a fantasy, and a dangerous one, because it's unattainable and therefore guarantees failure for anyone pursuing it. Nietzsche's concept of what he called amor fati, the love of fate, provides a radically different framework. It's not about eliminating negative experiences or uncomfortable emotion. It's about developing such profound acceptance of reality, including its harshest aspects, that you can honestly say you wouldn't change anything about your past, even the parts that nearly destroyed you. Not because those experiences were pleasant, but because they forged you into who you are. Look at Nietzsche's own biography. By his mid-30s, he was essentially an invalid, crushing migraines that lasted for days, vision problems that made reading agonizing, digestive issues that left him barely able to eat, insomnia so severe he sometimes went weeks with only a few hours of broken sleep. He had to resign from his university position. He wandered from city to city seeking climates that might ease his symptoms. He was isolated, in constant pain, professionally ruined, and during this period of physical collapse, he produced his most powerful work. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, on the genealogy of morals, ideas that would reshape Western thought, not despite his suffering, but because of what he did with it. He refused to let his circumstances determine his internal state. He made a choice, repeated daily, to transform his pain into philosophical fuel rather than allowing it to reduce him to nothing but a victim. This wasn't a romantic process. There was no moment of dramatic epiphany where everything suddenly made sense. There were months where he could barely write a paragraph, days where the pain was so intense he could barely think, periods where he questioned whether continuing was worth it. The transformation happened in the space between those moments of despair and the decision to work anyway, to think anyway, to create anyway. The key to understanding Nietzsche's approach is recognizing that he wasn't advocating for stoic suppression of feeling. He felt everything intensely, perhaps too intensely. The migraines weren't just physical pain, they were existential crises. The isolation wasn't just loneliness, it was confrontation with the possibility that his ideas meant nothing, that his suffering was pointless, that he'd wasted his life on philosophical questions nobody cared about. But here's what separated Nietzsche's response from most people's. He refused to identify with his suffering. He experienced pain but didn't conclude, I am a person in pain and therefore limited. He faced rejection but didn't conclude, I am rejected and therefore worthless. He encountered obstacle after obstacle but kept asking, what does this require me to become? Rather than, why is this happening to me? This distinction is everything. Most people's response to difficulty is to immediately contract, to make their world smaller, to reduce their ambitions to fit their current capacity. Nietzsche's response was the opposite. Every limitation became evidence that he needed to expand, to develop capacities he didn't currently possess, to become someone capable of bearing what previously felt unbearable. According to Nietzsche, the fundamental principle is this: you cannot develop genuine strength by eliminating challenges. You can only develop it by changing your relationship to challenge. The obstacle itself is neutral. What determines whether it destroys you or forges you is the interpretation you assign to it and the actions you take in response. For this to work in practice, 3 conditions must be met. First, you must be honest about where you're actually avoiding difficulty rather than facing it. Second, you must have a vision compelling enough to make discomfort worthwhile. Third, you must implement specific daily practices that gradually expand your tolerance for adversity. Without these 3 elements, you'll continue the same pattern, wanting strength while choosing comfort, wondering why nothing changes. But implementing these habits requires confronting something most people would rather ignore. It requires admitting that much of what you call self-care might actually be self-sabotage, that your boundaries might be prison walls, that your comfort zone has become a cage. It means facing the uncomfortable possibility that you're stronger than you've allowed yourself to be, and that your current limitations are self-imposed rather than inevitable. This confrontation is where the real work begins. So what does this look like translated into actual daily practice? How do you take Nietzsche's philosophy and turn it into habits that genuinely transform your psychological resilience? The method isn't complicated, but it demands consistency that most people find impossible to maintain. Not because it's physically difficult, but because it requires repeatedly choosing discomfort when comfort is available. And that choice goes against every modern instinct we've been conditioned to follow. The first pillar is what Nietzsche called voluntary hardship. This means deliberately introducing challenge into your life when you could easily avoid it, not recklessly, not stupidly, but strategically. Taking the stairs when the elevator is right there. Having the difficult conversation instead of letting resentment fester, starting the project that terrifies you rather than endlessly preparing. Each small choice to do the harder thing is a deposit in your psychological bank account, building reserves of resilience you'll need when involuntary hardship inevitably arrives. The second pillar is ruthless elimination of comfort seeking as a primary motivation. Notice how often your decisions are driven by avoiding discomfort rather than pursuing something meaningful. You stay in the unfulfilling job because finding a new one feels overwhelming. You maintain the dying relationship because being alone seems worse. You keep the same routines because trying something different triggers anxiety. Nietzsche saw this pattern as spiritual death, the slow suicide of never allowing yourself to become who you're capable of being. The third pillar involves what Nietzsche called becoming who you are, which requires establishing practices that repeatedly expose you to versions of challenge you typically avoid. If you fear judgment, speak publicly. If you hate conflict, initiate difficult conversations. If you avoid physical discomfort, implement cold exposure or intense exercise. If you fear failure, attempt things where failure is likely. The specific practice matters less than the principle, regularly doing what your fears insist you cannot do. The fourth pillar is maintaining what Nietzsche called the long view. Keep a journal documenting not just events, but your internal states during challenge. How did you respond when things became difficult? What patterns emerge? What beliefs about yourself are reinforced or contradicted? This practice serves multiple functions. It forces honest self-assessment, it provides evidence of growth over time, and it transforms suffering from something that happens to you into raw material for self-understanding. Look at what Nietzsche himself did during those years of illness. He didn't just suffer, he meticulously observed his suffering. He asked what it revealed about human nature, about the relationship between body and mind, about the possibilities of consciousness under extreme conditions. He turned his personal hell into a laboratory for understanding the human condition. This wasn't about making suffering worth it through some cosmic justification. It was about refusing to let suffering be wasted, about extracting every possible insight from every possible experience. Here's what's required for this approach to work. You must value growth more than comfort. You must be willing to feel incompetent repeatedly as you develop new capacities. You must accept that transformation is measured in months and years, not days and weeks. And you must develop the ability to function effectively while uncomfortable. Because comfort is temporary, but capability is cumulative. But implementing these practices inevitably leads to a confrontation that most people aren't prepared for. Because once you start deliberately choosing difficulty, once you stop organizing your life around comfort, you discover something unexpected and unsettling. The challenge itself isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is what emerges from within you when you can't distract yourself with ease anymore. It's time to talk about what actually breaks most people who attempt this path. The moment arrives quietly. You've been following the practices. You've been choosing the harder path. You've been building momentum. And then one day, in the middle of what should be routine difficulty, something shifts. The usual motivational thoughts don't work. The reasons that sustained you feel hollow. You're suddenly face to face with a question you've been avoiding. What if I actually can't do this? What if my limitations aren't temporary? What if I'm not capable of becoming what I'm trying to become? This is the real test. Not the external challenges you face, but the internal collapse of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you're becoming. Everyone who attempts genuine transformation hits this wall. The ones who succeed and the ones who fail are separated not by talent or circumstances, but by what they do in this moment of psychological crisis. Most people, when they hit this point, immediately retreat. They decide the approach was flawed, the goal was unrealistic, the timing was wrong. They return to their previous patterns, now armed with a story about how they tried and it didn't work, which becomes justification for never trying again. The temporary discomfort of growth becomes permanent evidence of limitation. They spend the rest of their lives in the safe prison of, I'm just not that kind of person. But if you stay with it, if you refuse to retreat, something else starts happening. The panic doesn't disappear, but it becomes less overwhelming. The doubt doesn't vanish, but it loses its authority. You realize that these feelings aren't signals that you should stop. They're signals that you're finally doing something significant enough to threaten your current identity. This is where psychological steel actually forms, not in the doing of hard things, but in continuing to do hard things after the initial momentum has died. Nietzsche understood this intimately. He wrote extensively about what he called the abyss, that moment when you look deeply enough into yourself and see not the heroic figure you imagined, but weakness, pettiness, fear, all the aspects of yourself you've been avoiding. Most people, he observed, immediately look away. They return to distraction, to comfort, to the shallow narratives that let them sleep peacefully. They choose the comforting lie over the uncomfortable truth. But the people who become genuinely formidable do the opposite. They look directly at what they found in the abyss. They acknowledge the weakness without identifying with it. They see the fear without being controlled by it. They recognize the patterns without being defined by them. This act of unflinching self-recognition is what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are. Not discovering some hidden perfect self, but seeing clearly what you actually are and choosing to forge something stronger from that raw material. As Nietzsche wrote, you must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? The burning isn't metaphorical. It's the psychological experience of having every comfortable story about yourself dissolved. It's the recognition that the version of you that got you here cannot get you where you're trying to go. Something must die for something stronger to be born. The function of this discomfort, this confrontation, this burning is clarification. When everything comfortable is stripped away, what remains is the truth about what actually matters to you versus what you merely thought should matter. You discover which commitments are genuine and which are performance. You learn which fears are protecting something valuable and which are just habits of avoidance. You find out what you're actually made of when the easy answers stop working. And here's what you discover in that space. You're capable of far more than you believed. Not because you're special, but because you've been operating under the constraint of untested assumptions about your limitations. The moment you stop accepting those assumptions as truth and start treating them as hypotheses to be tested, everything changes. Each time you push past what felt like a wall and discover it was actually a curtain, your sense of what's possible expands. The necessity of this discomfort cannot be overstated. Comfort teaches your nervous system to seek comfort. Challenge teaches your nervous system to seek challenge. Every time you voluntarily face what you fear, you're not just accomplishing the specific task, you're rewiring your fundamental relationship to adversity. You're teaching your brain that difficulty is not a signal to retreat, but a signal that you're expanding. Think of a blade being forged. The metal is heated until it's malleable, hammered until it takes shape, cooled rapidly to lock in the new structure, then heated and hammered again. Each cycle makes it stronger, but only because it's willing to be broken down and reformed repeatedly. You're the metal and the blacksmith simultaneously. You must be willing to break yourself down, to question everything you thought was certain, to reform yourself according to a vision that exists beyond your current comfort, to do this again and again until something unbreakable emerges. The transformation isn't dramatic from the outside. Nobody watching can see the internal reconstruction happening, but you feel it. There's a quiet, growing certainty that you can handle what comes. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because you've learned that pain is temporary and growth is cumulative. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've developed the capacity to function effectively without answers. Not because you're fearless, but because you've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to act despite fear. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, you realize something has fundamentally shifted. The challenges that once seemed insurmountable now feel manageable. The criticism that used to devastate you barely registers. The setbacks that would have ended your previous attempts now just feel like information to adjust from. You haven't eliminated difficulty from your life, you've become someone capable of metabolizing difficulty into strength. This is what Nietzsche meant by psychological steel, and this is where everything changes. The transformation doesn't happen suddenly. There's no moment where you wake up and suddenly you're different. It's more like walking through a tunnel where the darkness gradually gives way to light so slowly you don't notice the transition until you look back and realize how far you've come. The person you were at the beginning of this process would barely recognize who you've become. Not because you've changed everything about yourself, but because you've changed the fundamental relationship you have with yourself. When you emerge from this process, when you return to the ordinary world after months or years of deliberately forging yourself through difficulty, something interesting happens. The people around you don't quite know what to make of you anymore. They remember the person you were, the one who avoided conflict, who chose comfort, who played it safe. But that person no longer exists, and the replacement makes them uncomfortable in ways they can't quite articulate. Here's the irony of becoming genuinely strong. Nobody celebrates it the way you imagined they would. Your friends don't throw you a party for developing discipline. Your family doesn't applaud when you stop seeking their approval. Your colleagues don't recognize that you've fundamentally transformed your relationship to adversity. From the outside, you might look the same. You might even seem less impressive because you've stopped performing strength and started embodying it quietly. The people who knew you before notice that you've become harder to manipulate with guilt. They can't pressure you into decisions anymore. Their approval or disapproval doesn't seem to affect you the way it used to. You're less willing to accommodate their comfort at the expense of your growth. You set boundaries without explaining or justifying. You say no without guilt. You pursue your vision without asking for permission. These qualities make you invaluable as an ally, but deeply unsettling to anyone who benefited from your previous weakness. Watch what happens in conversations. You're less reactive to provocation. You can hear criticism without becoming defensive. You can face disagreement without needing to convince or be convinced. You can sit in uncomfortable silence rather than filling it with anxious chatter. You can let people be wrong about you without correcting them. These aren't skills you learned from a book. They're capacities you develop by repeatedly doing the thing that terrified you until it stopped terrifying you. The strangest part is the anticlimactic nature of it all. You worked for months, maybe years, to develop genuine psychological resilience. You faced your fears repeatedly. You chose difficulty over ease thousands of times. You burned through version after version of yourself. And now that you're actually strong, now that you've actually built the unbreakable mind you were seeking, there's no dramatic recognition, no external validation, no moment where the world acknowledges your transformation. But you don't need it anymore. That's the real transformation. You don't need other people to confirm that you're strong because you know it from direct experience. You don't need approval because you've learned to generate your own sense of worth from your actions rather than others' opinions. You don't need certainty because you've developed the capacity to function effectively in uncertainty. This is what Nietzsche called becoming who you are, and it's nothing like the destination you imagined when you started. According to Nietzsche, this is the essence of the Übermensch, the person who has overcome themselves. Not overcome their humanity, but overcome the fear that keeps most humans trapped in patterns of comfortable mediocrity. Not someone perfect, but someone who has learned to transform their imperfections into fuel for growth rather than excuses for stagnation. Not someone invulnerable, but someone whose relationship to vulnerability has fundamentally changed. You stop needing to prove anything to anyone because you're no longer trying to convince yourself of something you doubt. You simply are what you've forged yourself into through relentless practice, and that speaks for itself to anyone with eyes to see it. The people who matter recognize it without you saying anything. The people who don't matter wouldn't recognize it even if you explained it perfectly. And you've become comfortable with that reality. Think of how a master craftsman moves through their workshop. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish, no performance for observers, just competence so deep it looks effortless, built through years of deliberate practice nobody witnessed. That's what genuine psychological strength looks like. Not dramatic, not performative, just unshakable competence in the face of whatever emerges. You've become that person, not through some mystical transformation, but through daily choice repeated until it became your nature. The ripple effects extend far beyond what you initially imagined. Your relationships change because you're no longer willing to compromise your growth for temporary harmony. Your work changes because you're willing to attempt what might fail rather than guaranteeing mediocre success. Your internal experience changes because you've learned to generate peace from within rather than depending on external circumstances to provide it. Everything shifts, but it shifts so gradually that only you understand the magnitude of what's occurred. And here's what Nietzsche knew that most people never discover. This transformation isn't the end of the journey, it's the beginning of the real one. Because once you forge yourself into someone capable of handling genuine difficulty, once you've built a mind that cannot be easily broken, a question emerges that couldn't exist before. Now that you're strong enough to pursue what actually matters rather than what feels safe, what are you going to do with that strength? That's where we're heading now. What does it actually mean to have an unbreakable mind? Not in theory, not in philosophy, but in the texture of daily experience? It means waking up and choosing deliberately rather than defaulting to habit. It means facing the day's challenges with curiosity rather than dread. It means understanding that difficulty is not a problem to be solved, but the mechanism through which you continue to grow. It means living with a kind of fierce joy that most people never access because they're too busy protecting themselves from discomfort. Nietzsche's conception of strength wasn't about dominating others or proving superiority. It was about something far more profound. The courage to become yourself despite every pressure to remain what others expect. That courage isn't born from confidence, it's forged through repeated acts of defiance against your own fear. Every time you do the thing that terrifies you, every time you choose growth over comfort, every time you face what you've been avoiding, you're practicing that courage. And practice accumulates. This is the alchemical process Nietzsche described. You take the base metal of your fear, your weakness, your limitations, and through the application of sustained willpower and deliberate challenge, you transform it into something precious. Not by eliminating those aspects of yourself, but by changing their function. Fear becomes a signal that you're approaching something meaningful. Weakness becomes information about where to focus your development. Limitations become temporary boundaries to expand rather than permanent definitions to accept. Nietzsche believed that genuine strength is always in service of creation, not destruction, not domination, not proving anything to anyone. Creation, building something that didn't exist before. Whether that's a work of art, a business, a relationship, a community, or simply a version of yourself that's more honest, more capable, more alive. The unbreakable mind isn't built to survive. It's built to create despite the obstacles that make creation difficult. True freedom, in Nietzsche's philosophy, isn't the absence of constraints. It's the capacity to function powerfully within constraints, to create meaning despite limitation, to maintain your vision despite resistance. Most people think freedom means having no responsibilities, no challenges, no difficulties. But that's not freedom, that's childhood. Adult freedom is the ability to choose your response to circumstances rather than being controlled by them. The best version of yourself that you're capable of becoming isn't comfortable. It's not easy to maintain. It requires constant vigilance against the seductive pull of comfort, constant resistance to the voices that tell you to be reasonable, to slow down, to accept less. It requires treating your life as a work of art that demands your complete commitment, not as a problem to be managed into tolerable mediocrity. It requires, as Nietzsche put it, becoming who you are by repeatedly choosing to be that person, even when it would be easier to be someone else. When you've built genuine psychological resilience, your presence changes in ways that are impossible to fake. There's a stillness that comes from knowing you can handle what emerges. There's a directness that comes from no longer needing to manage others' perceptions. There's an authenticity that comes from having faced yourself honestly enough times that pretense feels more exhausting than vulnerability. These qualities can't be performed or learned from a book. They can only be earned through the process we've described. This isn't the end of difficulty. You'll still face challenges. You'll still experience setbacks. You'll still have moments of doubt and fear. The difference is that these experiences no longer define you. They're weather patterns passing through, not permanent conditions. You've learned to distinguish between your circumstances and your identity, between what happens to you and who you choose to be in response to what happens. That distinction is everything. After everything we've explored, two questions remain. What part of your life are you treating as a problem to be solved when you should be treating it as a challenge to forge you? And what would change if you stopped waiting to feel ready and simply began the work of becoming unbreakable? Nietzsche would say that these questions have no theoretical answers. They can only be answered through action. The mind of steel you're seeking doesn't exist somewhere in the future waiting to be discovered. It's forged in this moment, through the choice you make right now between comfort and growth, between the familiar path and the challenging one. If this video challenged your assumptions about strength or revealed patterns you've been avoiding, leave your like and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the human mind through Friedrich Nietzsche. Until the next video.